Okay, hey, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. To have a really great episode for you about a really underappreciated gem that I consider neo vintage. I've recently been kind of inspired within that rabbit hole to follow, and I did want to make sure to share some of my findings with you guys. In terms of the type of watch, you can see this is Seiko. A little about them: they were founded back in 1881. They are Japanese in origin and have factories throughout Asia. They cover all market segments from entry level to high end. And in terms of the type of watch, this is a dive watch. Some key characteristics and design which you're looking for a diver: of course, you're going to want water resistance, typically some type of screw down crown. You're going to want something that's tough, legible, with a dive time bezel, and a diver extension is always nice if on bracelets. This is a neo vintage 90s era Seiko Scuba 4S15-7000 or SCVF003. And this is a titanium dive watch powered by Seiko's now legendary 4S15 movement, which is an evolution of their Danny Seikosha 52 streamline of 4Hz chronometer certified King Seiko movements, with the 4S movement mainly remembered for its use within the now highly collectible SUS military field line of watches and Red Alpinist releases of the time. This unique diver has all of the hallmarks of a future collectible without quite yet being as highly sought after, which is good news for all of you. The movement, the full titanium construction, the visual styling cues to both the historical and modern alpinists, and that short window of production during an evolutionary phase of a very famed brand in Seiko make this an extremely special piece. Currently, as of the summer of 2023, these are trending kind of plus or minus $250, above or below $1,000, depending on the condition and location, wherever you're purchasing from. This one was sourced from JDM Watches for Sale, which is an Instagram account I will leave a link to in the description. Big shout out to them, and very, very cool. And they even sourced an extra link for me to make this fit my larger, 7.5-inch wrist. So with that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, guys, so the numbers here, a little bit about them and getting this all going. 40 millimeters in diameter, only 12.6 millimeters thick, 46 millimeters lug to lug, all titanium, brushed and polished, dual curve, hardlex mineral crystal. Actually, I believe it's single curve hardlex, because if I get it to a very harsh angle, you can see there's a bit of distortion at the edge there, which is going to add a bit of visual play. And then in terms of the bezel, 60 click, unidirectional rotating, with that nice shielded loom pip at 12 o'clock. This is extremely good bezel action, especially for 60 clicks, especially on a titanium watch. I'm just blown away. And there are some reasons why this watch is going to feel more premium than your average kind of neo vintage Seiko, and one of those reasons is the era. Now, when these were in production, this was during a time when premium mechanical watches were trying to make a comeback. Quartz were the premium option, and then they became ultra affordable, which caused that whole quartz crisis to crash. And then eventually, hey, come in the 90s, and it's just like, hey, well, now not just Japanese, but of course the Swiss brands were really leading that push to say, hey, well, premium mechanical watches are something that's special. There's something that's has a bit of longevity, a bit of history. So this was really marketed to be quite more upstream than your typical diver. Hence this movement, an evolution of a chronometer certified. Yes, they used to do chronometer certifications for other watches that weren't produced in Switzerland, and until Seiko ruined that by just being too darn good at these chronometry trials. So this movement, 4Hz, smooth sweep, very, very nice. It hits all, and this was actually serviced recently back in, actually this year, I should say, recently serviced in 2023, depending on when you're watching this, because you could be watching this in the future. 40-hour power reserve, And it does also offer a hacking seconds hand, which you don't always get in vintage models. Again, this is more neo vintage. And then another great detail is, check this out, guys, monoblock case. So no case back. It is all just a single piece of titanium, which is not easy to do, especially, you know, when you're doing things in a very low volume. We've seen, of course, these types of constructions on more expensive 300-meter saturation divers from Seiko, whether they be kind of in the vein of, you know, the 6159 Marine Masters, or in the vein of the tunas. So very cool to see that in a 200-meter kind of all titanium, ahead of its time type. And some of you are looking at this this profile here and you're saying that looks familiar, and I will say it does look familiar. If you are a big fan of Grand Seiko divers, you'll recognize this particular profile. And I mean, this was again such a precursor to so many things that came after, right? Even getting to this dive extension, you're going to see here, it's just push-pull, so it doesn't have the fancy ratcheting mechanism that you would see in a Marine Master, but available again very early, you know, in terms of being ahead of the market with something like that. So just push and pull, and there you go. So very, very cool. Again, you probably would want to use that for micro adjust. So you're going to want to get this dialed in, because you can see there are no manual micro adjust holes. These are solid links, but they do have hollow end links. And that is just something from the time, you know, even your most expensive watches during these years had things like hollow end links, unfortunately. But hey, the good news is, period correct, everything's nice, screw down crown, signed. Again, you might recognize this crown. Hey, it looks very Alpinist-ish. It is. You know, this shares a lot of DNA with the red Alpinist, which would pretty much set the blueprint for the SARB 017, which set the blueprint for today's modern Prospex Alpinists. So you can see a little bit of a different variation on the handset there, but it is, of course, does have that cathedral handset. And then now you're even looking at the dial and noticing, yes, that actually has the Laurel, old school Laurel Alpinist indices, which I think is, again, really cool. It just ties in so many little nuanced nods to things that are inherently Seiko. And you guys know I have a huge Alpinist collection, so hey, I'm probably the prime person that's going to appreciate something like this. Some of you might be looking at this dial and go, hey, it doesn't do anything for me. But this beautiful Sunray cream dial looks great. You can see it has that slope chaptering, which has been a hallmark for Seiko for a long time, because people are, you know, have been upset with the alignment issues. You can see no alignment issues here. Again, this was more of an upstream offering. You're getting these great polished hands in the gold. You're getting Seiko Lumibright, really fantastic. And then, you know, you can see there, it has the term divers on the dial, which you can't just put on there unless you are ISO compliant. So this 200 meters is quite serious in terms of its capabilities. It has 19 millimeter lugs, which isn't great, to be honest. 20 millimeters would have been better, but 19 in 2023 works out fine. There's a lot of brands that are doing 19 millimeter options more often, you know, more and more. So then getting to kind of wrap up the bracelet, hollow end links, solid links, hollow end links, stamped clasp, but actually really nice for a stamped clasp. You can see the construction is very solid. Even, you know, there's not a lot of play. Even after all these years, this thing isn't jangly to any level there. That's actually pretty outstanding in terms of flex after all these years. And then, of course, this just everything fits together, stays together. This is just a beautiful example in terms of its condition and how great it looks, especially considering its full titanium construction. You would think something like this would just look pretty bad and thrashed very, very quickly. Not the case at all. So with that said, let's actually get this piece on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay guys, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, this wears just beautifully. Check that out. Lays wonderfully, those organic lines, those undercuts, signature Seiko here guys, and it makes everything look how thin that mid case looks because of the shape. That is wild. But of course, if I do get my wrist a bit too close to the lens, you're going to get some perspective distortion. So what I like to do is just lay my wrist down here and then just kind of tighten up the shot so you guys can you know, still get a detailed look, but while keeping a bit of a truer aspect ratio. And you guys can see on the wrist, this wears fantastic. Very Alpinist-like, not just in its looks, but in its wear profile as well. Let me zoom this out just a touch. There we go. And it looks fantastic. It wears well. And again, this is full titanium, but it does have thicker links and it does feel quite solid and hefty, and probably a bit from that mono block case there. So this is going to be all front loaded, and man, look at that smooth sweep there. Very, very nice. 4 hertz, 28,800 vibrations per hour. Beautifully done. So I just dig this a whole lot. And you guys know, especially from my other videos, let's say, you know, hey, the Grand Seiko Alpinist, right? Secret Alpinist Grand Seiko review that I've done. This is kind of like a secret Alpinist diver, titanium you know, you can just this again, it just hits some of those high marks in terms of a collector or somebody who's just passionate about this particular brand. And you know, I think one thing that people can agree on, as much as people aren't maybe all equally thrilled about you know, where Seiko is now, in terms of where Seiko has been, there's still a lot of undiscovered gems. And that is, you know, really what I wanted to share with you guys, is something that right now is kind of on the cusp of becoming a lot more collectible in the long term. And now I would say is the time to find yourself a really nice example for your own wrist, a model that you can wear and you can give it its own character by adding a little bit of, you know, your own patina to the story of the watch, and not feel too bad about it. I mean, you can pick up something like this for less than a premium you know, Seiko diver today, and this is going to arguably, you know, be a little bit higher positioned in terms of the grand scheme of things, you know, when you think about the time and the offerings, than some of the you know, more kind of middle tier options that are all great, and I've reviewed tons of them on the channel and I own a bunch of them, but definitely something to consider. So with that said, let's get it off the wrist, set up for some lume shots, light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Oh yes, even after all these years, another great thing about Seiko LumiBrite, it still stays bright. It's not like tritium that's going to fade. This is still working quite beautifully. And one thing, of course, I always like to work in is a bit of low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or maybe just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it is nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting, to maybe even include some harsh lighting that could expose any types of factory defects. But here you're just going to see a bit of wear, a little bit of light wear anyway, and man, this is just such a gorgeous example. But I mean, there are a lot of finishes and facets on here to take on wear, so I think this is one that absolutely will look great. And if you pick one up and not the greatest you know, condition, just know that this thing looks pretty darn cool even in a bit of a more rough and tumble condition. But you can see very, very legible here, guys. This thing is just fantastic looking even in different lighting situations. And of course, well lit, it does a darn good job of catching your eye. So guys, closing thoughts on the wrist: lightweight titanium construction. It still has enough heft to feel quite premium, so that's one of the nice things. I know that can be a point of contention for some folks in terms of sometimes a watch feeling a bit cheap just because of how light it may be. Oh, I think my camera's wanting to focus on the background a little bit more than the watch. My apologies. So In terms of model variants, this was also available with a black dial, which would be the SCVF001. This is the 003 with the cream dial, so you can look for either of those references. I think they're great. I personally gravitate more towards this just because it's a bit more unique, while some other folks might gravitate more towards the black because it's going to be a bit more classic, a bit more versatile. I'm just at a point within my collecting where I look and for things that to be more unique, to be more stand out, and to kind of be able to hold their own next to another piece, right? With not just in a vacuum of I like these individually because of how versatile they are. I like to think of them as falling within a more of a collection, which eventually should be kind of sharing a state of the collection with you guys, at least state of the core collection. So in terms of comparable models, guys, tough to draw comparables with vintage watches, even neo-vintage pieces. So that is something to consider. But bottom line, the unique combination of design and features that are so unmistakably Seiko, yet still so unlike Seiko to kind of combine and cross over into a single watch that make this piece a real winner in my eyes. The 90s neo-vintage space is so ripe with underappreciated gems from a time when brands were really looking to reinvigorate the premium mechanical market with extremely unique offerings such as this little titanium Alpinist-like diver. It's just a big W for me. It's a big win, and this watch, it's if they came out with something, if they reissued this with a 6L movement today and even a screw down case back, I would be thrilled. I think this is a really cool period of history for Seiko. I don't know if they'll revisit it because, of course, they're into a lot more of the kind of the original releases in terms of their heritage in the 60s and 70s releases. But eventually, these 90s releases will come back into the light. So I'm looking forward to that. But with that said, let me know what you guys all think in the comments below. If you like the video, please do like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.